Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Fail Instruction Manual, no other than Mr. Dean Cooper. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Dean. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a career, professional basketball coach, either through college and then into the NBA. 20 over 20 years in the NBA as an assistant coach and front office executive. And for the last couple of years, I've been doing consulting work in that regard, and just doing some TV color analysis and things like that here around Nashville where I live. And then this past fall, I started putting together my book, Fail, which we're on here to talk about today. So, and how I got to that and why I got there and why I think it's a vehicle that can help people eventually succeed.
Mr. Dean Cooper, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. So, how did you choose which topics or words to include for each letter of your book, Fail?
Yeah, it's a good question. How I came about it was very interesting. I had put together a product that instead of having long-term consulting, I would go in and do seminar work, say for a day for 4 or 5 hours with athletic departments and organizations and talk to them about healthy culture, vertical alignment. How do you have sustainable, healthy culture? What does that look like? And one day as I was walking, I walk about 5 or 6 miles about 4 or 5 days a week. I just said, most people go and tell people how to fail or how to succeed. I said, maybe I should just take a different approach to it and tell them how to fail. And then later that day, I was sitting here. You can see I have some guitars in the background, and I have a book called, it's an A to Z book. It's kind of a children's book for adults, for lack of a better way to put it, just illustrations. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book for A to Z book on how to fail. And I've been studying behavioral economics and emotional intelligence for a long time. It's mostly what I do when my reading and listening when I'm walking. And so I just put down my guitar and I picked up my computer and I started going through the alphabet and wrote down several words under each letter that would are dysfunctional and toxic behaviors that cause us to fail. And then I had to, melt that down or hone that down into words that weren't synonymous and different meanings. So that actually took not that long because I have such a pretty deep knowledge of it. So that's kind of how I came about the eventual words.
Very well said, Mr. Dean. Very well said and clever. So, was there a particular letter or entry that you had the most fun writing?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've had a lot of people ask me that since I've started on this journey with the book the last couple months. I don't know if there's a particular letter that stands out. If I had to give an answer, the two things, letters that I would probably choose, 2 or 3 that I think people is the most common amongst people is the letter A. And the letter A is kind of a bullet point page. Each page is a little bit different. Some of them are bullet point pages, so there's actually several behaviors under a particular letter, and some are more just paragraphical, where it attacks that or touches on just that word. But A is the word avoid, and then under the avoid are several, and I can show you here on camera, are several bullet points. So some of those bullet points are, and I think this is the one that applies to a lot of people, is avoid difficult conversations. People want to avoid difficult conversations. Avoid holding people accountable. So I think that letter in particular, because those two particular, and it's ironic that those are the first two behaviors listed in the entire book, because I think they're some of the ones that we struggle with the most. The other one is L, which is lack communication. And under lack communication is don't return phone calls, don't return texts and emails. And we've gotten into a society, and society's gotten into this thing, in my opinion, where, and this is directly tied to the avoid difficult conversations, or I think people are on communication overload. So they just choose to, for lack of a better way to put it, what people use is ghost people and feel like that's okay. Like, well, they'll figure out I don't want to respond. I personally don't think that's an appropriate way to handle it. If it's something you got to say or don't want to say, or you don't have time, at the very least, you can just give them a minimum response. And then the third letter I think that people struggle with the most is R, which is resist change. There's a saying that I'm not a particular fan of, which is, well, we're going to do it this way because it's the way we've always done it. Well, that's a direct road to failure. I mean, the world is constantly in evolution, and there's some things that you definitely should hold on to. But there's also this thing called evolution and progress, and those things that you have to be aware of and you have to embrace. And even in that, at the end of R, which is a paragraphical page, I say, you can just call the offices of Blockbuster, Polaroid, and BlackBerry. They'll be happy to answer your questions on resisting change, because none of them exist.
Definitely.
Because that's what they did.
For sure. So, Mr. Den, what do you hope readers take away from a book that pokes fun at failure?
I don't know if it pokes fun at failure. I don't know if I would categorize it that way, but I think it's a humorous approach and somewhat sobering approach, like to get people to identify. The first thing you have to do is identify these behaviors. The second thing is you have to acknowledge them, and then the third thing layer is you have to address them. So the point of the book is for it to take some of the edge off, and maybe to have some organic conversations, or and make people laugh and go, golly, we have some of that in our culture and our team and our organization. I've personally, like, this book is not hey, I've never done these things. Unfortunately, there's some self-reflection in this book. I've done some of these behaviors. We all have. We all don't have all of them. And the ones that we do have, we all have them. We have them at different levels. Maybe some of us have lack of communication as a 2 as a problem, and some of us have it at 8 or a 9 or a 10, and then we have resist change, we're flip-flop. So, and then some of us don't have them at all. So it's an awareness factor, no different than what I've likened it to with a lot of people that I've spoken to. Is it's no different than any person going through any level of addiction. Is you're never going to get rid of it per se. You may never completely eliminate it, but the awareness of it helps you to curb it, and it helps you for it not to infect your life in a negative way, or in this case, your team or your organization, and sometimes yourself.
Very well said, Mr. Dean. Beautifully articulated. So, how would you describe your overall tone in the book?
My what? I'm sorry.
Overall tone in the book.
The tone is, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, it's pretty sarcastic, but it's somewhat straightforward. I mean, the first couple pages, I lay out, like, I have a disclaimer page in there, and I say, hey, this book is going to maybe cause heart palpitations, excessive sweating, deep reflection. You might have to put it down and walk away. And, it's meant to be a satirical. It's why it's called the Satirical A-Z guide. Is one of the subheadings is, it's a satirical, kind of sarcastic way to come at, unfortunately, things that aren't funny and are toxic and quite debilitating to us at times.
So, were there any entries you thought might be push the boundaries a little too far?
I don't know about push the boundaries. I mean, I'll use the resist change page, for instance. Like, I had somebody who reviewed the book said, well, do you think that's a good idea to call out those companies, Blockbuster, Polaroid, BlackBerry? And I said, well, this isn't opinion. This isn't Dean Cooper's opinion. If you do research on these things across behavioral economics in particular, those three companies are well cited. And the reason that they don't exist is they resisted change, but Netflix, obviously, in regard to Blockbuster, digital photos in regard to Polaroid, and BlackBerry want to keep their keypad, when clearly Apple has dominated that market. So I don't know. I think people, maybe there's some things in there. I don't think it's controversial per se. It's just direct at times.
So, is there a favorite failure or personal story behind inspiration for the book?
Wow, that's a really good. It's a really good question. I think the one for me that I struggle with actually is the very last page of the book, which is Z, which is zone out. And as curious as I am, I'm a very curious person. It's my website's called spaceforcuriosity.com, because I think you have to have space for curiosity in lots of levels of your life. But one of the functions, behaviors that I have in Z is just zone out, like when other people are talking. And I think for me, sometimes it isn't that I don't want to know what people have to say. I think we do notice that when people start talking about things that we don't agree with, we just zone out. Like we just tune them out. We choose not to hear them. But then the other part of it is sometimes we get in our own head, and it's something I personally struggle with, is I'm not zoning out on purpose, but I'm a thinker. So I start thinking about things that they're saying, and I miss other things that they're saying. So for me, that's something I'm well aware of in myself that I have to fight daily.
So, Mr. Dean, what will be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Yeah, I think I wrote the book. I honestly, like, I hope I I hope I get the book out to the world and people latch onto it and buy it and use it as a, you can see it's a coffee table book. You can read this book in 20 to 30 minutes. You can read it in 20, 30 minutes, but you should spend a lot of time reflecting on it. But as much as anything, is besides the book, it's a vehicle to create traction and conversation, and go out and do seminars for people, do keynote speaking on these behaviors, where eventually it will help them. And I have some other ideas on some books that I'm going to write. I'm not a writer. I'm a basketball coach who just thinks a lot and is, proudly pretty well read. I read a plethora of topics, which is kind of how I came about this. So I do have some other ideas, but I think they'll be in this format. And I also think it applies to just where we're at today. Everybody wants short form reading.
True.
Nothing against. I've read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and not in books of that thing, but people pick up. I got a whole bunch of them sitting right here behind me where I read. But they look at that book and it's 180 pages or 200 pages, and they're, and people give up on it early. And I mean, you can go through this in 20 or 30 minutes,
So,
and I'm not sure I have the capacity to write longer than that.
good luck to your goal, Mr. Dean, and looking forward for more and more empowering books like this to come. So, what would be your advice for those people out there who want to write their own book?
To write their own book? I
Yes.
think for me, it's interesting how mine came about. It, like I said, it literally went from, man, I should tell people how to fail. Everybody tells them how to
True.
succeed. It's like listening to Charlie Brown's teacher on the other end of the phone, right? So, I thought, I'm just going to do it different. And then later that day, I literally was sitting here playing my guitar, and I glanced over at that book, and I said, that's it. I'm gonna write a book. So here's what people get mistaken is people mistake that you have to get motivated before you take action. And it's actually backwards. You have to take action, and that will create more motivation. Sometimes just the act of starting something. So I literally didn't hesitate. I literally sat my guitar down, not the one you can see there, a different one. And I picked up my computer, and in 4 days, I had the content of this book basically written. Then it was just cleaning it up. Obviously, long form books are a totally different task. But I think just the main thing I would say is we have it backwards. We think people sit on their couch and they get in their head and they think, well, I'm waiting for the motivation to come and then I'm going to take action. No. Just take action and the motivation will follow. Once you start something, it's like a lot of people have probably seen the guy who pulls the locomotive, right? He hooks himself up to the locomotive. The hardest part is getting the locomotive started. That's where it takes the most inertia. Once that thing's rolling, it rolls by itself.
Totally agree, Mr. Dean, and thank you so much for your advice. And don't afraid to commit mistake or fail, people, because you will learn from it in the process. So if you could pick one entry from the book that best represent its spirit, which would it be?
One entry that probably best represents its spirit. Well, that's it. That's a really good one too. Man, I think I'm going to actually pick not a letter.
Yes.
I'm going to pick two things, and it's going to be the first quote, because I have about 6 or 7 quotes throughout the book from outside people. And even before the first letter is a quote from an Army general, Eric Shinseki, who's a U.S. Army general. And even before the first letter, he says this. He says, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. And I think it's really important. Like, we have to embrace it. And then the very last quote of the book is from Socrates, and it's one of my favorite quotes. And he says, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think. And I think that's really important. Is we, at the end of the day, we can't teach anybody anything. They have to be willing to embrace it. So I'm not going to pick one of my letters, but I think the very first quote about accepting change and the very last quote of, look, man, we got to spend some time in thought. Those are my two favorite parts of the book. That, you know.
Very well said, Mr. Dean. Very well said. So how do you hope someone who is currently feeling like a failure will react to your book?
How do I, like someone who's feeling like failure?
Yes.
Well, my hope is that we all recognize is that we all fail to some extent at getting these behaviors right, because we have them. Like, these are our default behaviors: avoidance, blame, complacency, gossip, fake hustle. I just hope people read it and it's a sobering thing to say, I have some of those, and these are things holding me back. Or I'm the leader of a team or an organization, and I'm allowing these things to happen, and I'm not addressing them, and it's holding us back. Because it's holding us all back to some extent. None of us, we all have flaws. We're all flawed human beings to some extent, and different levels and different flaws and things like that. So that would be my hope. Is like I said, I even admit it here on the show, is this isn't a finger pointing thing. I've unfortunately done these things at a louder volume at points in my career that I wish I had.
Certainly. So, Mr. Dean, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to for my 5 audiobooks. People, of course, my Book 101 review series, Book 101 Review Volume 3 or Volume 1, highly recommended, of course, available on Audible. And Life is Too Short, a journey of discovery, fulfillment, and joy. Stand tall and stand together, breaking the chains of bullying. And of course, my Book 101 Review Volume 3 suggestions, and my climate change book, Earth Fever, The Unraveling Climate and Our Race to Restore Balance. And my Book 101 Review Volume 2 selected, and my Book 101 Review Volume 1 highly recommended, and one of my self-help book, Threads of Existence, Weaving the Tapestry of Life. So please do listen to them, available on Audible and one of the bestsellers. So, Mr. Dean, if my last question is, are there any plans to turn fail into serious? Or maybe a satirical A to Z guide on success next?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the logical thing is to write a book in a similar book, just on the success side of the equation, and that maybe that's in the works. And I have some other ideas about other topics I want to keep in that same format. So I think they'll come down the pike before too long. But my goal is to get this out there and to help people, and to use the things that I've been very fortunate in my career. Worked in the best basketball league in the world with some of the best people to do it in the world, both on the player side and as coaches in front office and things like that. So that's kind of where my focus sits right now. But I have these ideas in my head, and I'm sure they're going to get themselves down on paper at some point in the not too distant future.
Mr. Dean Cooper, thank you so much for sharing your empowering book to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your book?
Yeah, you can check out the book, and you can my website's called Space for Curiosity, SPACEFORCURIOSITY, Curiosity, spaceforcuriosity.com. You can read about myself. I do a weekly blog on there every Thursday. It's updated. You can buy the book on there and kind of see about my journey. And, I would encourage people to be curious. My book, your books, whatever those look like, and find some space to grow.
Definitely. That's why Einstein discovered relativity, because of his curiosity. People, let's support Mr. Dan Cooper, because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Dan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.